In today's video we're going to be looking at the first part of party policies and ideas. So what we can see here is a little definition of political parties today. So read through that. This is before we describe the nature of political parties. We need this definition. If we then look at each of the elements in our definition, we can also develop a useful set of features which most parties conform to. The first part then is that they have to be organised. They need to do this in order to carry out many of their functions. So a vague and disorganised group of people will find it difficult to be able to create a coherent political programme and will be unable to fight elections successfully. An exception is perhaps the British Green Party, which prefers to remain a loose, informal organisation. And new parties such as UKIP find organisation difficult at first, but they're getting into their stride now. The next one, parties must develop policies and programmes to present to the electorate to secure the elections of their candidates. Behind such policies usually lies some kind of ideology. We'll be looking at that in more detail later. Large parties have the securing of government office as their primary goal. That's fairly straightforward. Some of the smaller parties may not necessarily strive to become government in power, but to try and influence the government in power in some way, in other ways. If parties are to make progress, though, they must gain public support for their policies. So therefore, this means they must have strategies for winning such sort of support. They have to devote much of their work to presenting their policies, educating the public, and also engaging in persuasion. Nextly, when a party is in a position to fight elections, it must select suitable candidates. Procedures must be put in place for selecting the best, always assuming that there is competition for such positions. The Green Party in the UK has always been reluctant to recognise leaders. It's an intensely democratic party. It's highly suspicious of the exercise of political power, but it's an exception. In most cases, parties ultimately rely upon successful leadership. So they're the features of political parties. In comparison, then we've got functions. So we've got features, then we have functions. The functions of political parties, perhaps the most recognisable function, is the development of policies and political programmes. This becomes especially important when a party is in opposition and is seeking to replace the government of the day. Next, we have representation. Parties may have their origins in the representation of social classes, but in all main parties, the argument is that they represent the national interest. Next you have selecting candidates. Parties spend a great deal of their time selecting particular candidates for office at all levels. Then identifying leaders. Parties need leaders. In the case of the main parties, this is potential government ministers. Then they organise elections. At election time, parties play a critical role. Education. It's not only at election time, parties have an education function. They're also continuously involved in the process of informing people about issues of the day. And then reinforcing consent. Finally, parties have one hidden function, but a vital one. This is the mobilisation and reinforcement of consent. All the main parties support the political system of the UK, parliamentary democracy. They operate and support this system. So the next thing that we want to look at is the idea of factionalism. Factionalism is where we look at, before we look at the philosophies and policies of the main parties, we need to consider the significance of factions within parties. This might be a splitting internally of political parties. There are various reasons for that. We'll analyse this in more detail as we go through the lessons. So once we've understood the functions and the features, we need to understand the difference between left and right. As you can see here, in terms of left and right, there are various differences between them when it comes to either the economy or social issues. So take a look at the following parts, pause this and make note of how the left and the right and the centre differ from each other when it comes to the economy and social issues. And when it comes to left and right for political parties, parties in 2014-15 have, in the majority of cases, become quite centralised. They need to try and appeal to the majority. So a lot of them centre or centre-left. However, you can see here from the case of UKIP and the BNP that some are becoming more right-wing. The Green Party is slightly more left-wing. So again, we'll analyse these in more detail. The next video that we're going to be looking at is in particular on conservatism, the Conservative Party.